For quadrilaterals, we know it has four sides. Start with parallelogram. Remember the arrows mean parallel, so if you ever see arrows on lines, it's saying those lines are parallel. The characteristics of the parallelogram that you need to know are these here. Opposite sides have to be parallel. The opposite sides are congruent, so that means top and bottom have to match here, and then left and right have to match there. The opposite angles are congruent, so that means these are always going to match each other, and then those are always going to match. So the diagonals bisect each other. What are the diagonals?
The things that go, it defines the action. Well, I know that's the art definition.
All right. For this, where would the diagonal be? Let me ask that. More specific than that. You go from one corner to the other corner. That's a diagonal. All right. So there's one diagonal, and there's the other diagonal. Bisect means what?
Intersect.
Nope. More than that. Cuts.
Following students need to report to room 613.
Bisect means cuts in half, two equal parts. So that's where this equals that, and then these two have to equal each other. All right, so bisect cuts in half. If I have this, is that enough to say it's a parallelogram?
No.
No, because that's only one side and it's got to be both pairs. But if I have this and I know that they're equal, then I know it's a parallelogram. So if both parts work, then it's a parallelogram. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Which ones out of that 1, 2, 3, and 4 are supplementary? 1 and 3 would be supplementary because they're consecutive. 2 and 4 would be the same, but then 1 and 2 would be consecutive, and 3 and 4. And supplementary means what? Add up to be 1/8. Did we get those yesterday? Rectangle?
Yeah.
All right, so a rectangle, quadrilateral with 4 right angles, has these characteristics down at the bottom. Now, a rectangle is still a parallelogram. So all of the stuff that works for parallelogram still works for rectangle. So all of these rules still work. It's just we have some extra ones. Opposite sides are congruent and parallel. Well, that's the same thing. Opposite angles are congruent. That's the same, except in this case, what are all my angles going to be?
Right.
Which means they are how many degrees? All of them have to be 90. The consecutive angles are supplementary. That's the same rule. One thing that changes is this right here. The diagonals are congruent and bisect each other. What did it do on parallelograms? What did it say on parallelograms for the diagonals? What did it say on the diagonals?
Bisect each other.
Bisect each other. What does it say on a rectangle?
Congruent.
They are congruent and bisect each other. Which means all 4 of these things in here are going to wind up being the same on a rectangle. And then of course we've got the 4 right angles. All right, did we get this yesterday?
No.
All right, get that one. All right, for a rhombus, definition says parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. So again, all of the rules that work for parallelogram still work for this. The only difference is that the diagonals, what do they do on a parallelogram?
They bisect.
Bisect each other. But in this case, they are perpendicular and they bisect the opposite angles. Which means perpendicular gives me the right angles inside. So I'm going to have right angles in here. Then these angles in this corner are going to match those angles in that corner, and then the same thing here, those two are going to match those two. Alright, for a square, it says it's a parallelogram with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. What does that match up with What else does that match up with?
Rectangle.
The 4 right angles means rectangle. The 4 congruent sides means
Square.
yo, rhombus. So a square is actually a rectangle and a rhombus at the same time. Which means all of the rules that work for those
Work for square.
have to work for this one. So the diagonals bisect each other. That's from a parallelogram. The diagonals are congruent. That's from a rectangle. They bisect the pair of opposite angles. That's from a rhombus. And they're perpendicular. That's from a rhombus. All right? So a square has all of the characteristics of a rhombus and a rectangle and a parallelogram. All right, for trapezoids, it has one pair of parallel sides. Normally they have it like top and bottom. The parallel sides are called the bases. The non-parallel sides are called the legs. So that would be a base, that would be a base, leg, and a leg. Make sure you get this down at the bottom. If the legs are congruent, it's called an isosceles trapezoid. Isosceles just means we got two sides the same. So if the legs match and are congruent, then it's isosceles. All right, kite has two pairs of consecutive sides congruent. What that's saying is these two at the top are going to match, and then these two at the bottom are going to match. The two pairs of consecutive sides have to be congruent. The diagonals are perpendicular. Perpendicular means what? Perpendicular means what? Makes right angles inside. Perpendicular is right angles. We should know that by now. Only one pair of opposite angles are congruent. That's going to be these right here, going across. Those are going to match up. The top and bottom ones are not. All right. Make sure you get this right here and understand it. What this is, all of these are quadrilaterals. You come down from quadrilaterals, parallelogram is here. Here are some of the characteristics for parallelogram. Well, then you go from parallelogram, you can have a rectangle or a rhombus, and then down to a square. Trapezoid is by itself, and up under trapezoid you can have an isosceles trapezoid, and then kite is by itself. So make sure you get this right here so we can understand what we're dealing with. All right, the way to use this chart is this. When you look at a figure and you pick out what it is, you go from that up, and that'll tell you all of the possible names. For example, if I see something that I think is a rectangle, well, if it's a rectangle, what else does it have to be? And if it's a parallelogram, it's still a... So you start here and you work your way up the chart, and that'll tell you all of the possible names for whatever that you're dealing with. If I think it's an isosceles trapezoid, in order to be an isosceles trapezoid, it had to be a trapezoid first, and a trapezoid is still part of quadrilaterals. If you think it's a square, if it's a square, it has to be a rectangle and a rhombus, and both of those are parallelograms, which is still quadrilateral. All right. Again, this symbol right here means perpendicular. When you see these right here, what does that mean? Parallel. All right. If you know these rules, you should be okay. But I'm telling you now, you've got to know these rules. And if you don't take the time to study them, then you're going to be in trouble when we start doing this stuff.